Hello, welcome to the 10th section of our full stack Kotlin course. In this section we'll dive deeper into React and we'll be touching state management in a large-scale React application. We will be taking a look at consideration when externalizing the state in a React application and how to use the one-way data flow and flux architecture to handle the state better. And finally we'll start implementing our own Flux by using the Redux library. So we'll create a new Redux bindings for Kotlin as well as a React Redux components with our Kotlin application. And lastly, we'll go through some state querying patterns and event emitting with Redux and Kotlin. In this video, we'll be going through application state and how to extract that into an external store. We'll identify an entry point and the shape of our application data and determine a container for a React component that manages that state for us. And then we'll create a model to contain that state and start extracting the state from our inner components into a container component and then inject it back to inner components. Previously, we created a main function and implemented a hash-based router for us. On the section 10 video 0 commit, I have added a project list and a form to the application. This form itself is a standard HTML form using Bootstrap styling. We have few different React components in here. So we have a text input that takes a change event lambda function that is used 3 times in this form. And then we have a drop down that is taking an action lambda function. Both of these change and action lambda functions are modifying the internal state of our form component. So we have a internal state that contains name, URL, owner, and language project entity fields. The other component is a project list, which is just for displaying purposes. This is a simple table that again uses Bootstrap styling. We have table headers and then we are mapping through the items that are passed in as props and displaying those. Note that the items is a list of projects and we have project entities within our model file. So we have a project entity in here that contains a static function identity that can be used to create an empty project. If we take a look at this on the front end, the form looks like this, and we have a React DevTools open for us in here. So if we start writing into our form component, we can see that the state within the component is modified and it is updated accordingly. We can also try to submit that, but currently we haven't bound any actions to the submit button apart from printing out the actual object that we have created. Because the form is a top-level component, and if we jump back into our list view, the project list is a top-level component, we run into a problem where we are not actually able to share the data between the form and the list view. So that is something that we will be implementing in this video. If we open up our index.kt file, you can see that we are passing in items into the project list. It's currently an empty list and we should be getting the item or populating the items list from our form component. There are a few ways we can tackle this, but the easiest way, and in my opinion the best way, is to extract a top-level component that handles the state for both project list and the form component. To start doing that, we'll modify our form component and start refactoring this. So instead of creating a stateful component, we'll modify the form to be a React DOM stateless component. That means that we'll get rid of the state and the state modification completely, and we replace that with a props class that takes in all the needed functions as well as elements. So in this case, we'll get project of type project, an update function, and a submit function in as a props that are passed into this form component. First update we want to do is modify the clear state private function in here, so we don't have the state anymore. We'll replace the clear state to call the update function from our props, and we pass in an identity project, so that way we can create an empty project or state the project that is contained in the state of the parent component. We also need to modify the text input fields. So in here we are using setState as well. Currently we don't have state anymore in the application, so we need to replace that by a call to the props update function. So we'll do that. We'll call the props update function and we pass in a copy of the props project. We use Kotlin data classes copy function, and instead of passing in the same name in this case, we'll just create a copy with the new name that is the actual input field from our text input. And also we bind the value of this text input to be the props project name that we are passing in into this function. Let's modify the URL and owner as well. So these two are fairly similar, so I will just paste these guys in. So we'll just call the props update method with their corresponding copy method calls as well. The dropdown is a little bit different, but again we are just using the same Kotlin data class copy method and using that to create a new project object that we are passing down into our update method. In this case, we do need to call language value of, because our language is an enum. So we'll take the value of the string that we are getting from our drop-down component. Last but not least, we also need bind the submit button action to do actually something. So in this case, we are already passing in a submit function, so we'll just bind the action to be our props submit. That is everything for the form component. So now we have a form component that doesn't have an internal state at all. Every update that it does goes back to the parent component and calls the update method in there. So now if we jump back into our index.kt, we can start creating the parent component. First thing we want to do is modify our method. So previously we were rendering and changing the component on a top level. Now we'll remove that completely and we'll just render one component. In this case, that'll be a state component. This state component takes in one prop, which is a hash. So this state component will make sure that it renders the correct element for us. In this case, we'll create the state component within the same file because we will be refactoring this away later. So if we take a look at this, you can see that our state component has props that takes in a hash and extends our props, of course. We also have an internal state within our state component. So we have a project list that is an array in this case, and we have a current project, which is the project that we are passing into our form component. As you can see, we are updating the state of this component within the update function and the submit function as well. So in the submit function, we'll add a new project into the project list, and we are updating the current project to be an empty project. That is everything for this way of passing in down props and passing down functions to child components, and therefore externalizing the state of our application. So I'll hit Ctrl F5 and rebuild the front end side of the application. If we take a closer look while the application is building, you can see that we are still calling the setState function, and we are updating the current project as well as the project list within the setState function. Now we have our component up and ready to run. So we have a state component that wraps around our form component. And now if we update our form, you can see that the state is contained within the state component. The form itself has only props that are read-only, and the state component contains all of the state. Now, if we click the submit button, you can see that the project list is updated with our project that we created. And that means if we jump into the list view, we have that project available for us.